This is the unspoken rule of dating, that it's the man's job to make sure the date goes well. Where's the best place to take her, though, that will ensure this? In my opinion, on where you should actually go. We're going to be reacting to Improvement Pill's dating tier list. Now, Improvement Pill is not a dating coach. He's an uplifting YouTuber, and I love his content. We're going to react to 43 different dating ideas and where he puts them on the tier list. And at the end of the video, I'm going to give you my tips and tricks to have a perfect date. With that being said, let's get into the video.
Yo, bitch, I got some buzzes clawing at my fucking stomach.
I'd like to introduce the AVN Bootcamp. We will be approaching women at a porn convention. We will be picking up porn stars. We will be going out and approaching these beautiful women for 3 days and then hitting the clubs at night. This bootcamp is 25% off usual prices. Only 2 spots available. It will be taking place the 5th through the 7th. If you are interested, text 702-841-9909.
Today I'm going to rank every single date idea that I can think of. Hopefully this helps those of you that are unsure about what to do for a first date, and also those of you that are already in a relationship but have run out of ideas, because it's always good to spice things up. Now, the truth of the matter is, all date ideas can be good. It really depends on what you and your date enjoy. But it wouldn't be a tier list video if I didn't have some sort of ranking system. So the 4 things I'm going to use to rank each of these date ideas today are, number 1, how casual is it? This refers to how much effort is needed to set up and go on such a date. Casual dates are usually better for first and second dates as they are a lower time commitment and seem more natural, which makes your date feel more comfortable. Number 2, how much rapport can be built on such a date. This means how much talking, eye contact, and light touching will naturally occur. This is crucial for furthering any romantic relationship. Number 3, how fun is it? How likely will you and your date laugh and smile? Because of course you want your date to look back on this day with fond memories. And finally, number 4, how flexible is it? Meaning, does it allow you to do other stuff before or after the date? Because the more things you do with someone, the more rapport is built. With that being said, let's jump right in. So we'll start off with one of the most common date ideas, going to the movies. It's super casual, doesn't require much planning. It's flexible because you can do something before and after. But the problem is you can't really talk or even look at each other during a movie. So it's very hard to build any rapport, which is especially important early on in a relationship. You can do movies later on, but definitely not for a first or second date. So I'm going to put it into the B tier. Next on the list is one of my old favorites, which is the park. I used to bring all my dates to a park back when I was living in New York City, and that's because it's very casual with tons of flexibility, right? You can grab a bite nearby and walk around while talking, and depending on what's in the park, you can do a bunch of different stuff, like play on the swings or sit somewhere and enjoy a nice view. There's a lot of opportunities to build rapport while doing these things, but it really depends on what park you bring them to. So overall, I'd give this an A. Next up on our list is grabbing a meal together. Personally, I prefer to grab a meal before I do another activity, like a walk in the park. But it's perfectly fine to just do lunch or dinner if it's a first or second date. It gives you time to get to know the person, and it's also a low-time commitment thing, so it comes off as very casual. Now, it's definitely built into us to feel closer to people that we share meals with, so you can build a good amount of rapport. But it really depends on your conversation skills. So overall, I would rank this as a low A-tier idea, as it's usually not.
I usually try to avoid doing things that guys that are awkward and creepy do. Just because girls will have like an attachment to a certain type of idea or a certain type of date. And I've seen a lot of girls that have been on dates with weirdos who've taken them out to dinner. So for that reason, I never take a girl on a date to dinner, just because it is such a creepy guy thing to do. Is hey, want to go out to dinner? And they'll try to win her over by buying her nice food and whatnot. Then the guy gets mad at her when she doesn't want to sleep with him at the end of the date. Like, that's what?
Fun or memorable. On the other hand, you have going for street food. I would actually rank this higher than just grabbing dinner, because getting street food usually means that you're walking around a night market or some sort of street fair where there's tons of different food and things to do, which makes the experience much more fun. I would rank this as a high A tier because as
any kind of date where you're walking around, way better. You can get a lot more physical. You can be more playful. There's a lot more stuff to do. The conversation topics flow a lot better, as opposed to being in a movie where you're stuck and sitting there looking at a screen. You can't have any conversations or get to know each other.
The benefits of sharing a meal while having a lot more activities that you can do together, but only if you can find a good spot. Next up on our list is going to a museum or an exhibit. This is a date idea that's great for deep thinkers. Now, personally, I don't think this is a good first date activity unless you know for sure that your date is interested in this type of stuff, because some people might find the entire experience boring. If, however, you and your date love talking about deep ideas and admiring art or history, then it's definitely something that could work. It's also pretty casual and flexible.
I found a lot of girls, whenever they say they like museums or they like intelligent things, they just say it to try to impress you, especially if you are somebody they find high value. I've known a lot of girls to like say that they like things like museums, but the whole reason they say they like museums is because they're just trying to impress you. I rarely talk to a girl that actually likes things like this. Museums are definitely something you want to take a girl on a date once you get to know her better, especially not as a first date. Never do this as a first date.
Overall, I'll give it a high B. Next up, we got going for a drink at a bar. Now, this is one of the most common dates you'll see in young adults. I know some of you look down on the idea of getting intoxicated with someone else, but in many places around the world, it's part of the culture, so it comes off as a very casual date. Now, alcohol lowers inhibitions, so it'll make both of you less anxious. This often leads to more playful touching and flirting, but you gotta make sure that you and your date are pacing yourself. Don't binge drink because you don't want to be put in a situation where you or your date get too drunk. 1 to 3 drinks for the night is ideal. Now, personally, I would rank this in the mid-A tier as it's a perfectly fun date idea at any point of a relationship, but only if you and your partner are open to social drinking.
I think going on drinking dates is a great idea. I do it quite often. Most places I'll take a girl on dates to, I want there to be drinks available in case she wants to drink, in case she wants to loosen up so that she can have more of a flowing conversation. Sometimes girls will come on a date and they'll just be fucking nervous. Dates are terrifying. So, having drinks at a place you go to is a great idea. Oftentimes, places where you have drinks at are dark, so they won't feel as judged.
So we have grabbing a coffee or tea, which is the classic 15-minute date. This is by far the most casual of all date ideas, and it's best used for a first date. Its purpose is to see if there's any chemistry at all. Now, this type of date is not fun later on in a relationship because at that point, it's not really even a date. I'm putting this into the low A tier because it's something that you can use early on in any relationship. It's the most casual of all dates, and it's a very flexible date idea.
So whenever you want to sell a girl on going on a date with you, you want to sell on lack of risk. Not how awesome a date is, not how crazy and fun it's going to be. No, you want to sell it on lack of risk. Because women are more amped to be fearful of doing something, unless it's something that the girl like just has been wanting to do for a very long time. And it's an experience that she can only get with you because of some XYZ reason. For the most part, girls are less likely to go on a date if they feel like there's a lot of risk involved. So you want to make it as easy as possible and as low energy as possible. Going on a coffee date is pretty easy. It's very low energy, it's very low risk.
That allows you to transition into something else later on in the day if there is chemistry. Next up, we got pottery or some sort of crafting activity where you and your partner go somewhere and make something together. This is quite the time investment because it can take a few hours to make whatever it is that you're trying to make, and you also have to be quite focused on what's happening in front of you. Now, there is some room to build rapport. You can joke around about whose cup looks better, but for the most part, you'll be focused on what's happening in front of you. Overall, I'd give this a mid-B tier. It's a decent date idea, but only later on in a relationship. There is the added bonus of creating something together that will remind you of the date. I once made a bowl with my girlfriend, and we still use it to this day, and every time we eat from that bowl, it brings back some fond memories. Similarly, we have the cooking class date, which is something that I've gone on multiple times. It's basically the same as a crafting date. Personally, I like this more because I like to compete with my girlfriend to see who's the better chef, but overall, everything is about the same. So I'm giving it a slightly higher B tier, right above crafting. Next up, we have ice skating. This is a somewhat casual date idea that's great at building rapport because most people are not great at skating, which means there's the potential for a lot of light touching if you or your partner is a newbie. You can hold their hand to steady their balance. You can stay by them as a safeguard if they're about to fall, stuff like that. And usually you'll find skating rings in or near malls, which gives the added flexibility of doing something before or after the date. So overall, I'm going to rank this as a mid-A tier. It's not something that you'd usually do for a first date, as it is a sort of mental commitment, especially if they've never done it before. But it is pretty good for a second date onwards, in my opinion, as it can lead to a very fun and memorable experience. Next up, we got going to a sports event. This is similar to going to the movies as your focus is on the event in front of you. But there is this added bonus of feeling the energy of the crowd, which does not happen at the movies. This does make it more fun, but only if you and your date are both fans of the sport. This date is a pretty big time commitment, so overall, I'm going to rank it as a B tier idea. It's slightly higher than movies because you can build more rapport, and it's also a more memorable experience. Now, before we rank the next date idea, I'd like to give a quick shout out to this topic at hand. We got the zoo. which is basically the same as going to the park, but there's usually more stuff to do at zoos. But it does feel slightly less casual than the park. Maybe it's the fact that you have to pay to go in, or because you have to wait on lines. But overall, it's still a great spot in my opinion, so I'm giving it a slightly lower rank.
If I were this guy, I'd definitely put it more in the tier of a museum. You don't know if she's into... She will be more likely to be into something because it's cute or cuddly, but in general, it's also kind of a nerdy thing to do, and there's kids around. There's not as much trouble that you two could get into. If you go to a park, for example, a park, you can make out and kiss, you can do a lot more. In a place where it's not so... It feels a little bit more ambiguous as opposed to being in an enclosed space. You can like leave at any point. You don't have to like the waiting in lines between. It makes it feel more sterile. So a date in a park, I feel like is a better date for a first date than a zoo would be.
Than the park. Next up, we got the mall, which is by far the most flexible of all date ideas. There's food, arcades, bowling alleys, sometimes even skating rings and movie theaters. Going to the mall is extremely casual because people hang out in the mall all the time. This plus the unmatched flexibility makes it, in my opinion, one of the best spots for a first date or any date in general, which is why it deserves a spot in the S tier. Then we got going to the spa or getting a massage together. This is something that you should probably only do much later on.
There are reasons that I disagree with it being in the S tier, but I'll get into that at the end of the video.
Relationship, as it can be a pretty big time commitment, and you can't really talk or even look at each other when you're getting massages, so there's not much rapport that can be built. So overall, I'm going to have to put this in the low B tier. Next up, we got a couples dance class. Now, this is a pretty big jump outside of one's comfort zone, so it's something you should save for much later on in a relationship. But if you do go on this date, it is by far one of the most rapport-building dates out there because you and your partner literally have to be in sync in body and mind in order to execute the moves properly. So overall, I'd give this a low A tier because it can only be done when you're already very comfortable.
Some of these dates would actually raise the flakiness score of a girl. Depending if she says in her bio, like, let's say you meet her on a dating app, and she says in her dating app she likes dancing, this won't probably affect the flakiness score because she's very confident dancing. Now, if you don't know she likes dancing, it could raise the flakiness. You're trying to sell on lack of risk, and he's thinking in terms of like selling on like how fun it will be. You also got to keep in mind that some of these dates will raise the flakiness of a girl wanting to hang out with you. A coffee date is a very low effort. You don't have to expect anything afterwards, so it doesn't raise the flakiness score of a girl, or it's not going to raise the chance that she's going to not show up. So you got to keep that in mind too when you're setting up these dates.
Each other. Then we got karaoke. Now, this is a pretty fun date idea. You have the option to get drinks, which can lead to a wild night, or you can do it sober. But either way, doing karaoke usually requires a fair amount of rapport to have already been built. Most people feel shy singing in front of others, so it's definitely not something you do for a first date. But later on, maybe for a third or fourth date, it's a great idea. It also depends on the culture. There are some countries where it's perfectly normal to do karaoke, and others where it's much more rare. So I'm giving it a low A tier ranking as it's quite niche. Then we got the beach. Now, this is a pretty big commitment depending on how far away the beach is, and also the fact that you have to bring a bunch of stuff like a change of clothes, towels, and sunscreen. Personally, I don't find going to the beach fun if it's a one-on-one date. It's usually more fun for me when there's a larger group of people, so I'm giving it a high B tier, as it's a bit harder to pull off and definitely not for a first date unless you literally live next to a beach, or if there's something like an amusement park next to it that you can go to. Which brings us to the amusement park. Now, this is by far one of my favorite date ideas these days. It is a pretty big time commitment, so you shouldn't really use it for a first date, but it scores high in all three of the other aspects. It's extremely fun with tons of flexibility because there's endless things to do, and there's plenty of time to talk while you wait for rides or eat. And even though it's usually a huge time commitment, it does come off as extremely casual and playful because it's essentially a giant playground. So this is definitely going into the S tier for me. On the other hand, you have the water park, which is basically an amusement park, but with water. So it has all the benefits of the amusement park, but it's an even bigger commitment mentally because you have to wear more revealing clothes, which a lot of people would not be comfortable with early on in a relationship. So it's definitely not something you do for a first date. But overall, I put it in the high A tier. It's loads of fun, but maybe only from the third date onwards. Then we got the escape room, which is basically where you're put in a room and have to solve puzzles to get out. It's only a 1 hour commitment and it's usually located in a mall, so there's tons of flexibility. But it's an acquired taste. Some people enjoy it, others don't. Personally, I love going to these even outside of dating. Like if I'm hanging out with someone for the first time, I usually ask them to do an escape room with me. When you're doing one, you're forced to work as a team to overcome.
He doesn't think much about raising the flakiness of a date, and that definitely would raise the chance of a girl not showing up. You want to keep it very casual. That's a very big component of creating a really good first date, is keeping it casual, making sure that it's not too much investment for a girl. A girl doesn't want to feel like she has to go through all these different jumps and leaps with you, and there's a chance of you being creepy or weird on a date.
Goals. So it's amazing at building rapport. It's also very memorable because you're put in a high stakes environment that's totally different than anything you'd normally experience in real life. So overall, I'd give this a high A tier. Next, we got bowling. I think this is the most casual of these sports related dates, right? It's fairly easy to learn, and unlike other sports, you don't constantly have to move. So there's a ton of time to talk. There's even room for some friendly competition, so you can actually build a good amount of rapport easily. On top of that, there's usually food and drinks, so you can share a meal, which is always a plus. It's also not much of a time commitment, and it's pretty flexible depending on where the bowling alley is located. So overall, I'd give this a middle A tier. Then we have the arcade, which is one of my favorite date spots. It's actually where I took my girlfriend for our first date. It's very casual and comes off as very playful, and it's almost always in or near a mall nowadays, so there's tons of flexibility. There are tons of games you can play, which can also lead to some friendly competition. And if it's one of those arcades that gives you tickets, you can even win a prize that gives you a memorable little stuffed animal or something along those lines. This is the perfect date at any point in a relationship, so in my eyes, it deserves a high spot in the S tier. Next up is rock climbing. Now, this is definitely not something you should do for a first date unless you and your date both happen to love it. I'm saying this because it's quite the workout. Every time I go rock climbing, I end up being covered in sweat with extremely sore forearms, so it's quite the ask for a first date. There also isn't much time for building rapport as you're mostly focused on the wall in front of you. So overall, I'm putting this in the mid B tier. Then we got clubbing. Now, personally, I love going to the club, but it's one of those things that only certain people like. Usually those who enjoy crowds, drinking socially, or dancing. If your date isn't really into any of that, then there are better options out there. But if they are, then it's one of the funnest ways to end the night. There's tons of flexibility because you can do a bunch of stuff before going to the club, like grabbing dinner together. When you're at the club, there's tons of rapport you can build, tons of light touching that occurs from dancing together. Overall, it's not great for a first date, but from the second date onwards, it can be quite fun. So I'm putting it in the A tier. The same goes for a party. We're talking about something like a house party. Now, the main difference between this and clubbing is that people at house parties usually know each other. So it requires even more of a mental commitment from your date to want to go with you, assuming they don't know anyone there. So it's something you shouldn't do until much later on in a relationship, which is why I'm putting it in the low A tier. And then we got going to a comedy show.
I'd actually disagree with that, but I'll get into that in a quick second.
Some sort of live show, which is sort of like a movie, but a bit less casual, but also a bit more memorable, especially if the comedian points you out and makes fun of you as a couple. Overall, I think this is better saved for later on in the relationship, where you don't have to talk as much, but can enjoy some laughs together. I'd actually rank this slightly lower than the movies, because it's less casual and a bit more of an acquired taste. Next up, we got a couples painting class. Now, in my eyes, this is basically the same as crafting, as you're focused on what's happening in front of you, and you end up with a piece of art that you can hang up on your wall for the memories. Although I'll place it slightly higher than crafting because it's usually less of a time commitment.
A lot of this also comes down to how comfortable are you in each dating situation. If you're good at bowling, hell yeah. If you're good in a situation where a comedian calls you out, hell yeah. If you're good in a club scene, hell yeah. That a lot of it is going to come down to what are you naturally, what are your inclinations, what scenarios are you the most comfortable and calm and confident with. Because whether the date goes well or not is ultimately your responsibility.
Then we got an interesting one, which is inviting them over. This is incredibly hard to pull off for a first date because it requires a lot of trust. But from the second date onward, it's definitely doable. Now, whenever you bring someone over, you're sharing the intimate part of your life with them. You're showing them what type of person you are. So it's very memorable and it builds a ton of rapport. There's also a ton of flexibility depending on what you decide to do in the house. You could cook a meal together, play games together, or even Netflix and chill. So overall, I place this in the low S tier because it's one of the most intimate dates, but it usually requires several dates before your partner is comfortable doing this.
Yeah.
Then we got canoeing or kayaking or any other water sport like this. this is a pretty big commitment. Some people get seasick or are scared of water because they can't swim, so it's really not for everyone. If, however, they happen to love water sports, then it can be great. You get to sightsee while having plenty of time talking to each other when you're on water. But because it's so niche, I'm putting it into the high B tier. And then we got camping or going on a road trip. Both of these are huge time commitments that require a lot of trust, so they're only viable much later on in a relationship. If you do go, it can be quite fun, but you have to make sure you plan ahead and bring a ton of things to do. It's very memorable and great at building rapport because you're basically surviving together, so I'm placing it in the low A tier because it's such a huge commitment. Then we got laser tag. This is something that I love doing. It's a lot of fun, but it's a pretty big ask for a first date. You're basically running around nonstop for 15 minutes, and most people are simply not trying to get sweaty on a first date. The great thing is that these are usually located in malls, so there's a ton of flexibility, and it's memorable because it's you and your partner against the world. But again, it's not that great for a first date, so I'm putting it in the low A tier. Then we got 3 date ideas that are all very similar. Watching a sunset, hanging out on a rooftop, and stargazing. All 3 of these are great ways to end a date, but they shouldn't be the only thing that you do on a date. They're more like a cherry on top. So I'm placing them all in the B tier if they are the only thing that you do. But if you stack them with anything else on this list, then they would jump up to a higher tier. Next up, we got a random tour in a city. This is only fun if either one of you is not a local because, well, locals don't really get excited going to well-known tour sites in their own city. Overall, this is a decent date idea because it's pretty flexible and it gives you a ton of time to build rapport. But because it's usually such a big time commitment, I'm putting it in the high B tier. Then we got doing a puzzle together. This is a very casual date idea that usually occurs at someone's house, so it requires that level of rapport to pull off. It's very casual but kind of boring, so it's definitely something for later on in a relationship when you've run out of stuff to do together. It does give you something nice that you can hang up on the wall though, but I'm still going to have to place this into the low B tier. And then we have going to a concert or rave. Now, this is a popular thing to do as a couple nowadays, but usually much later on in a relationship because you can't really talk at a concert or rave, but you can dance together. It's also not for everyone because you have to enjoy large crowds, although there is this magical feeling of being one with the crowd that usually occurs, which is nice. Overall, if you're both into a certain type of music, it can be fun, so I'm putting it in the low A tier because although it's niche, it is quite common for people to like stuff like this. Next up, we got biking. This is a somewhat casual thing you can do. You both rent some bikes and bike around the city. This allows you to be pretty flexible because you can...
And also physical activities release oxytocin, make you feel happy. If you ever got a runner's high, like it's a good way to also elicit conversation topics. It's a good date idea. I like
in multiple spots and do different things like eat or sightsee. If you plan out a few locations to go to, then this can be quite the enjoyable date. So I'm putting it in the mid A tier. Then we have a trampoline park. For those of you that don't know what this is, basically it's a giant facility filled with trampolines that you jump up and down on. It's sort of fun. You can do backflips and jump into foam pits. You also have plenty of time to build rapport and talk as you explore the different parts of the park. I usually see these in malls, which is great for flexibility. Now, I wouldn't do this for a first date, but from the second date onwards, it does seem alright. So overall, I'd put it in the low A tier. Next up, we got hiking. This is enjoyable if you and your partner like nature, but it does require a fair amount of trust because you're going into the wilderness together. It's also quite the time commitment, so it's not something I would do early on in a relationship. So overall, I'm putting it in the high B tier. Then we got something interesting, which is sleeping over in a unique place where you book a strange Airbnb, a haunted apartment, or something along those lines. Of course, since you're sleeping together, it's not something you can do early on in a relationship, but it can lead to very memorable experiences and loads of fun depending on how interesting the place is. Because it can be hard to find a worthwhile spot, I'm putting it into the B tier. Then we have volunteering, where you work together to help others out. It's filled with good vibes, but it's not something I would do early on in a relationship because it's quite the time commitment and the focus is on others and not you and your partner. But it is a nice way to spend the day if the two of you enjoy helping others out. Overall, I'm putting this into the low B tier as it is a very niche idea. And finally, we have mini golf, which is a fun, casual date idea, not a huge time commitment, and depending on where it's located, it can be quite flexible. There's a ton of time to chat while playing, which is great for rapport. So this can be a good choice for first or second date, which is why I'm putting it into the A tier. And that's it. We just went over 40.
I think he did a great job of tearing off dating ideas. He fucking crushed it. Now, here's the caveat that he does miss out on. Number one is utilizing your environment. Girls like guys that are leaders of men and chased by women. So how can you use this on a date? So what I'll do is I will actually create a hub at a certain place. I'll go there to work on my laptop. I'll go there just to eat with my friends. I'll make friends with the people that go there often. And I'll set up a place where there are attractive girls, where there's alcohol if a girl does want it, and there are cool guys. Usually a dark environment. I usually choose hookah lounges, or I'll choose a bar with pool. Now, the reason I do all this is because when I keep coming back to the place over and over again, the attractive girls there are now friends with me. The cool guys there are also friends with me, and they like me. I tip well, I talk about them, I know them all personally. So when I bring a girl into this environment, guess what? All the attractive girls there like me a lot. All the guys there are excited to see me. This sets up a precedence on the date that you are a high-value person. And she's going to like going on the date with you a lot more because she can see it physically. You're not going some random place where nobody knows you. You're the popular kid in the environment you take her into. So you're setting up the date for success. Again, Improvement Pill doesn't know this, but you can really easily recalibrate this entire list based on this fact. Based on this strategy, you can recalibrate this list. But again, I don't think that was his idea, was to strategically set up the date in the perfect way. He wasn't looking at it from a paradigm of strategy, like a weirdo like me would. But yeah, I love Improvement Pill. I love his YouTube channel. Fucking crushes it. All right, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you are interested in coaching, text me up at 702-841-9909. And with that being said,
Yo,
peace.
bitch, I got some buzzes clawing at my fucking stomach. I'm from the shadows.